Boo-doo-doo-doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. So today we're going to be looking at the Shibboleth by Doris Salcedo, who is a Colombian artist. And this is a postmodernist piece from 2007 to 2008. And it is 548 feet long. And it was made for the Turbine Hall, which is part of a modernist museum or postmodernist museum. And this building is the main hall. So looking into this image, I bet you're wondering what it really is, and what we're looking at is this long series of cracks on the ground, which does initially sound odd, but that's kind of the point of the image. It's kind of confusing when you look at these cracks because we do associate them with danger or something being wrong. We don't normally see cracks as a positive thing, and another big thing on it is when you look into the cracks, there is something below them. There is this sort of wire mesh that you see here, and that's supposed to give this sort of duality of if you were looking at it from the top, it looks like it's holding something in, and let's say you're at the bottom and you were looking from the top, it looked like it was keeping you there, so it's sort of like a fence in a way, and that actually goes hand in hand with the function of it because this is supposed to represent the immigrant experience, and it really shows this separation or this lack of unity that a lot of immigrants feel and how they sort of feel marked as outcasts. But with that, it also shows this idea of healing because though they are marked as outcasts, they can cross this fault line or this series of cracked lines, which is supposed to represent healing and how we can be empowered through what divides us and we can move on from it. Now, another idea with this, but it doesn't seem too heavily supported from what my research showed, was that these cracks also represent scars. And with the scars, it's supposed to mean damage, but it's also supposed to mean healing. Like we can move on from our damage and it'll serve as a reminder of our past. But that's not too supported, so I'm not sure the accuracy of that. But yes, the main function of this work is to be some sort of political commentary or social commentary on the world. Now, about the word shibboleth itself, it directly means ear of corn in Hebrew, and it's supposed to be a very difficult word to pronounce, and because of that, it's sort of become synonymous with words that are very hard to pronounce or say, and that have been used to distinguish outsiders of any sort. Like, there's an example of the word Lollapalooza being used by the US military during World War II to find mainly Japanese Americans or anyone who spoke an Asian language because they couldn't exactly pronounce all of the syllables in the word. So, yes, Shibboleth is talking about persecuting others for their differences and how they kind of stick out, and it represents this fear of being seen as an outsider, or fear of being seen as different, because as this outcast, it can mean physical danger or any kind of discrimination. And if you're going on the idea of scars, it also works to show this reminder of what we've been through and the harrowing lives we've had. So a bit on the context that Salcedo was a Colombian immigrant and she lived in both the US and in Europe. And this work is supposed to speak to immigrants and refugees of the 21st century, and mainly anyone who has been an outcast, because it's trying to say that we can move past it, and yes, the past does hurt. And the work itself took 5 weeks to install, and it costed about £300,000. And while this does look like the original floor, it's actually not. It is a bunch of Colombian rock slabs. And yeah, that's it. So what we have here is the Buddha at Bamyan, and it's made by the Gandaharan people. And it is cut rock, plaster, polychrome paint, and a bit of stucco. And it is located in Bamyan, Afghanistan, and it is 150 feet tall. The date ranges from 400 to 80 CE, and it was destroyed in 2001, and it is a Buddhist work. And so if we look at this image here, we will see that this is the stone that it was cut into, and this is sandstone. And these are an in situ work because they were cut into the rock that's already there. And what you'll see is that these niches right here, they're kind of shaped, or they are shaped like mandalas, and that's really to make the figures pop and get the attention of the travelers, but it's also to protect from any kind of weather or any elements that could cause the sandstone figures to erode, which you can already see that they did over time. So it's better that these were there to prevent that even more. And one thing that you can't see here is that there used to be gold and fine jewels all around, but over time, the pilgrims that took them, there were probably others that took them back, so those are gone. But one thing that we do really want to note here is the kind of appropriation of different cultures and different art styles, where you see that this face is in this body are more of an Asian art style, but the clothing, the wet drapery of sorts, where it kind of wraps around the figure's body and you could see the lining in it, where with all these folds, that's a very heavily Greek influence on this art. So it's kind of got this cultural mix. And one thing to note too is that the original artist and the patron are both unknown, so a lot of it's a mystery. But what we do know is that this was a very important site for religious pilgrimages, or just pilgrimages in general, because this was a very sought after location for Buddhists, and specifically the Mahayanan Buddhists. And we actually have two Buddhas that are studied in this sandstone. There's one over here in the western area, and there's supposed to be little ones over here, a littler one. And this is the main one that we're talking about. And the bigger one was originally painted with a red robe, and he was known as Salsal, which means shining light. And he is depicted as this supreme Buddha who is the highest, and he embodies all wisdom. So naturally, he's very large in size to show how wise he is, which is common in Asian art. And he's also a very masculine figure. And then in the east, there is a smaller Buddha in a blue robe who is known as historical Buddha, and this one may represent a female. So it's got a lot of female aspects and it's a lot smaller than the other, but they're not entirely sure. And one thing that isn't seen here is that there are cave paintings with images of Buddha that pilgrims used to walk through, and there isn't an image of these because a lot of them are very dated or they're not well lit. And just taking a bit of note on the context, this area of Gandhara is this culture that emerged from Alexander the Great's empire, and also a heavy influence from the Silk Road in the Indian kingdom and Buddhists that traveled through there. So this area kind of became this sort of conglomerate of cultures, and it led to a lot of differing ideas, as we could see with the art, but it also led to this sort of town of Bamyan being made into a cultural melting pot of sorts. And that's where we get some of these ideas, like I was saying, but it also connects with our other image, but I'll talk about that later. The big thing that I do want to address now is that this Buddha was large because it primarily has to do with the sect of Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism. And one thing also that I would love to note is that this is the modern version. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, it was destroyed in 2001. And it was destroyed by the Taliban because they determined that statues were idols, so they destroyed them. Now, I bet you're wondering how these two images are connected, considering one's a statue of Buddha and the other's a crack in the ground, and well, it's actually quite simple. They're both stone cut, where this is a Colombian rock and this is a large cave of sandstone, and they both have to do with immigrants, or they are the effect of the immigrant experience, where these people are all migrants from different cultures and they have moved to this area, and that's why this is a mixture of cultures. And the artist is an immigrant, so they're both talking about the effects of a culture moving and blending and the struggles of it. So they are related through their theming.